I realized that it is an intelligence. We are quite literally receiving more data about the world around us in a particular area.
When we do look after ourselves, when we do value ourselves, we are modeling that to our children.
Often what comes with that is a real drive to want to make a difference in the world in that area. And that's very strong in us as HSPs.
You're listening to the High Sensory Mothers podcast, and today I'm joined by Willow McIntosh, the founder of the High Sensory Intelligence Framework. In this conversation, we explore what it means to be a high sensory parent, how to honour your boundaries while raising emotionally healthy children, and why HSPs are uniquely positioned to thrive in both business and life. Let's get into it. This is the High Sensory Mothers podcast with Karen Hunt, where we discuss the ups and downs of motherhood for purpose-driven women with high sensory intelligence.
Hi, Willow. Thank you for coming on to my podcast. I'm very happy to have you on here as the father of high sensory intelligence. As I've talked about before, I never really resonated with the highly sensitive label. And so I was really happy to find you because you were turning it around and reframing it, and it sounded really positive to me. So do you want to just fill us in a little bit on how you came about to start using the term high sensory intelligence?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much for having me. It's great to be here. Yeah, so the shift really happened through my own experience and my suspicion that when I first found out about the trait many years ago, that there was something much more to it that wasn't being made available to me. I couldn't sit with the terminology. It didn't sit well with me that this was a condition that had to be managed. I just knew there was something much more to what this trait really means. And that really began my journey of research and training and really trying to understand what was going on for me. And during that experience, that's when I started to realize that the way that I'm processing the world around me much more deeply is happening in a very particular way. And it was allowing me to utilize a gift. And there was a powerful ability that was happening through my ability to be able to read more deeply. And the more work that I did around that, and eventually when I started to work and train other HSPs, I realized that it is an intelligence. We are quite literally receiving more data about the world around us in a particular area. And that is an intelligence, and we can utilize that in many ways. And it really is a tremendous benefit.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that I found really fascinating when I found out about it as well is this idea that we're not the only species on the planet that has this ability either. And something I wanted to ask you about, because I've commonly come across the figure 20%, like there's 20% of the population has this trait, but I've heard you talk about 30%. So I'm just like curious as to why you're saying 30%.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know what? The 30% came from, I was speaking with a very high level, I mean, he's a psychotherapist in London, but he's more of a human developer. He works at very high levels all over the world. And he is also an HSP. And he started to say from the research that he's been doing and the people that he's been speaking with, that 30% is more likely that we are meeting that number. And perhaps it's always been at that level. But I think it's also interesting to consider the spectrum of being an HSP that goes right the way up into autism probably covers a greater proportion of the population than just 20%. They refer to 30% now.
Yeah. Do you think that there's been, certainly from what I've discovered, there's been more of a development towards more neurodiversity in the world, more and more people being diagnosed? So do you think this is all like we are becoming more sensitive as species in general?
That's a good question. I think we are, well, because we're on an evolution of raising frequency in our conscious awareness. In other words, we're becoming more conscious generally. I think that sensitivity is an interesting way of looking at that. I think we are starting to become more sensitive to what it really means to be in balance with ourselves and the world around us. And as a result of that, I think being an HSP really helps us to grasp that concept more, and our role as HSPs plays a very important role in that. But yes, I think in general terms, I think we are becoming more sensitive to the truth of the world and to what it really means to be in balance, I think.
When I did your training course, I noticed that it's mainly women. Is that still the case, that you have mainly women?
Yeah, it's still a high percentage. It's probably about 80% women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And would you say there's a lot of mothers as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So when you've coached mothers, could you talk about what the common challenges are for them that you've noticed?
Yeah. I would say that overwhelm is, of course, one that is a big one for us as HSPs and for HSP mothers. I would also say that or the difficulty of knowing where boundaries exist and what's our feelings and what are our children's feelings, and how that kind of merges between the two. And the importance of taking responsibility for what we know is ours and making sure that we have healthy boundaries in place, so we're actually modeling the ability to stand our ground. I mean, I'm not saying that we stand our ground with our children in a way that's aggressive, that's certainly not what I mean. But what I mean is that we are owning what is ours, we're owning our boundaries, and we are modeling that type of independence for our children. I think that's very important for us as high sensory parents.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you said parents then, because I'm focused on mothers, but that's only part of the story, isn't it? Fathers exist. We're allowed to talk about fathers too.
I am a father, yes.
I know. So I'm curious about, and this is slightly off topic, I know, but I've been getting more curious about men and fathers and boys, especially. I don't know if you know about the Lost Boys report that was released recently. I watched a podcast where they were discussing that, and it's revisiting this idea that men are silently suffering. And I think obviously men who are HSP as well, it's going to be even more difficult for them, not feeling able to talk about how they're feeling and having to be portrayed in a certain way. So obviously, if you're married to a man, you've got a father for your children, there's a lot there that we could look at, I think. And so I'd be quite interested to hear your perspective as a father.
Yeah. Tell me a bit more about the Lost Boys. I've not heard of that. What is that referring to? So men not being in ownership of their feelings and emotions or be able to talk about their feelings, is that?
Yes. And there's some horrible statistics about suicide, which you're probably aware of anyway, of boys and young men and how much they're struggling. And so I think there's a danger, and this podcast was talking as well about dating and how difficult it can be for men and women having higher standards, perhaps women doing a lot more work and having higher expectations of men not being sure about what their role is anymore. So there seems to be quite a lot of difficulty, and for young people to be dating, there seem to be a lot of struggles around that. And obviously I've got girls, you have a daughter as well.
Me too. Yeah.
Though I don't have the direct experience of raising boys.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of concerns from mothers about how they raise their boys. Boys aren't quite sure who they're supposed to be, how they're supposed to behave.
It's a really important topic. I have to begin by saying this is not my area of expertise. I don't want to pretend that I know this area inside out, but I do have a I do have a sense that there is a shift happening in what it means to be raising boys at the moment. And in my experience, there's always been the challenge for men to be able to express their feelings. And I used to do some work with an organization called the Mankind Project many years ago, which is all about the process of initiating men into owning their shadow, owning what it means to be feeling, to be emotional, and actually to bring all of that forward in a healthy way. Because when we're repressing all of that as a man, it makes us very dangerous as men. You know, that amazing African proverb says that the uninitiated man will burn down the village just to feel its warmth. So this work was all about helping men to be able to be truthful in their authentic expression and their feelings, and how that helps us to access our vulnerability and ultimately our power. And then we are much more engaged emotionally, and we're much more useful in society in that way, rather than being this kind of repressed, painful experience. So there's that side of it. And I think that's very important for many men that are listening, for us to recognize that it's okay for us to be in the truth of our feelings, and to find a way to be able to express that safely and do any work that's in the way of us being able to do that. I think that's, first of all, that's very important. But I think the other area, and stop me if I'm touching in the wrong area here, but I think there's something else very important happening here, where we had to go through a very important shift where women were able to come into their empowerment in society. The suffrage movement, women having equal rights, all of that was an incredibly important shift that had to happen. I think during that time, there was quite a natural, a kind of offshoot from that, or a consequence of that, where men were then asked to be more humble and asked to be more respectful of women. And I think there was this shift that was to try to balance things. I think things went into extremes where women wanted to find that empowerment, wanted to be seen as strong, and then as effect were then saying to their sons, you need to be more passive and you need to be more respectful of women, and I need you to be not under control. That's not the right words. But I think what happened is that men are then saying, oh, okay, so I need to be much more kind of submissive. And what then happened is masculinity has then been labeled as toxic, when actually masculinity is a very natural, normal part of life. And I think we are now in a place where, as women, it's important, as mothers, it's important for us to get back into the mindset of recognizing that their son's masculinity is a beautiful part of who they are, and for that to be encouraged, so we can then find that natural balance of men being in empowered masculinity and healthy masculinity, rather than the toxic masculinity that was repressing women before. So I think we're coming back into balance with that again.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right, it's a huge topic, and I'm not an expert in it either. However, I do have my own experiences as a mother, as a wife, and as an ex-wife as well. And, I'm looking back and I'm reassessing why the marriage went the way it did and how things could have shifted. So I think there is an opportunity now, and I think it's really important, after understanding how important it is for boys to have a male role model. It's so important, and so many mothers like myself end up being a single mother. And I suppose, fortunately, I had girls, so it doesn't have such a detrimental effect for girls to not have fathers in their lives constantly, whereas it really does for boys, apparently, from the research I've learned about. So I think there's really an importance, obviously, for our own well-being, to be in a happy relationship, also for our children. So I'm wondering, if you're an HSP mother, are you going to be, I suppose, more in danger of encouraging your children, especially your son, to be more passive? And is that going to be problematic for them? I don't know what the research is on HSP children, but I'm wondering do you know how many children are HSP from HSP parents?
So it's genetic, so it is passed down. If you're an HSP, then one of your parents is going to be an HSP. So it's genetically passed down in that way.
Yeah. So is there some sort of percentage of how many children are likely to be HSP?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. But I think it's very important. If we, as a parent, if we know we're an HSP, then I think it's really important to help our children identify whether they're an HSP or not. In other words, for them to do the test and for you to become aware, is my child an HSP or not? I think that is a hugely important step in our parenthood to establish that, definitely.
Yeah, because most of us, as adults of our sort of era, we weren't brought up in a supportive environment for being HSP. But we do know that if HSPs are brought up in a positive environment or experience a positive environment, that makes such a difference and they thrive, right? It's like with the community that you have and the work that you do, you must see the difference between when people come in and then, when people eventually leave.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I think this is all falling into the area of identity. So if we are, as an HSP, when we're growing up, one of the greatest problems that we face is that we know that we're different and we know we're seeing the world differently. And what can happen is we are often encouraged when we're growing up to repress what makes us different, to repress our sensitivity and to try to follow the conventional paths towards success and towards being happy in society. And that often does not work for us as HSPs because we have a very different set of values. We see the world differently, and we're ultimately trying to achieve different things in the world. So that's certainly an important part of being a parent, I think, is to be conscious of what it means for us to be in ownership of the trait and for us to feel great about having these abilities and having these differences and thriving through the acceptance and ownership of who we really are. And then I think the same thing happens if we are raising boys. If we are saying to the boys, you need to be more passive, because I suffered a lot during my life because I had toxic masculinity in my life. And therefore, what I want to do is make sure that you don't grow up to be toxic in your masculinity. Therefore, I want you to be passive and I want you to be really respectful of women and ultimately be like a woman. Then we're then messing with that man's identity. And that then means that he doesn't feel safe in being authentic in his feelings and his masculine drives. If all of that's being repressed, then I think that's going to I know that it causes huge problems for men in later life.
Yeah. And it's the sort of and we know that as well from the other experience of women having to play the masculine role in work often. And then that then spill into the family relationship as well. And I know from my own experience as well, from being in more masculine working environments and doing masculine jobs. I worked in the stockbrokers back in the day in the city of London, and it's such a masculine environment. And then I went into sales as well. And again, very masculine sort of environment back then anyway. Obviously things have shifted, but you're put in a position where you can't just embrace your femininity. You have to embrace the masculinity. And I think this is the flip side of that now, because people are becoming more conscious, more respectful of different people's identities in all sorts of ways, whether it's gender or sexuality or whatever it is. So there's this not quite sure how to navigate this and not quite sure how to be this. And I think men, there are so many support systems now for people of different races, different genders, different differences, including being high sensory. We've created all these pockets, but I think it'd be quite hard to have somewhere just for men, especially for a white straight man, like, for example, like a big danger sign. And so I think somehow we've got to navigate that and realize that not all men are dangerous in being masculine. They need help in understanding how to embrace that and to be the protectors, the providers, the good parts of masculinity. And at the risk of speaking on this and saying to mothers, not only do you have to do all these things, you also have to watch out for your sons, and you also have to do this. Like, how do we help support mothers in all these areas that they need help with? They're probably still dealing with the hangover of growing up in a more negative environment because of their sensitivity. They may have a business, they have family, all these responsibilities. I think it's a lot. It's a lot. So what are your sort of thoughts on how best mothers can get the support they need to navigate all these things?
At the end of the day, it boils down to our own alignment as a parent. So in other words, if we are in the conscious practice and getting the support that we need to work through previous trauma and whatever is holding us out of our own authenticity and our own full self-acceptance, then that makes us a healthy parent, healthy mentor, healthy person in business. So I think if we are struggling with aspects of our children because they're triggering us, then that's our responsibility to work through that ourselves so we can then be much more supportive and in balance in our parenthood.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when one of my children had some struggles, and I was really concerned and upset. And I realized that when I spoke to people about her, the immediate feedback was, are you getting some help? That it took me some time to learn that lesson, because I'm like, it's not about me, it's about her. It's about her, help me with her. But actually, of course, it was about me getting the help that I needed to separate myself from that situation and not fully take on all the responsibility for my daughter, but to actually own my own part in that and to go through to identify what those triggers are and deal with that. So yeah, it's really important.
I agree. Yeah, very much. Yeah. It certainly is, we're not trying to raise children in a way that we think they ought to be raised based on our own kind of previous or whatever it is that's made us who we are. It's about recognizing our children for who they are and helping them to thrive in their authenticity and their truth and supporting that and, letting go of our expectations if they're not based in reality and based in our children's best interests. If they're based in our own kind of trauma in some way, then we're not launching our children in the way that is holistic and balanced.
So you mentioned before about modeling, and that's something that I believe is really important. And I think because we're HSP and because we're women and because we're mothers, it's sort of a triple whammy, really, of putting everyone else's needs ahead of your own. But actually, what I've come to learn is that when we do look after ourselves, when we do value ourselves, we are modeling that to our children. We are demonstrating to them that you are valuable, because they don't look at us and think, oh, she needs to keep doing all these things for me. They look at you and they say, well, they think, okay, this is the way to behave. This is the way to live. This is what I need to do as well. And they obviously internalize that messaging. And so modeling is the important thing. But we can often feel guilty, can't we, for looking after ourselves or for taking time for ourselves, especially with younger children. It's a bit easier when they get older, I think. But when we do look after ourselves, they will take note of that and they will follow that lead, really. We've talked bit about different things, but I wanted to bring it round to this idea of why HSPs are ideally suited to be in business for themselves, to be entrepreneurs. So what are your sort of thoughts around that?
Yes, I think well, first of all, I think what's important to begin with is that as HSPs, we have a tremendous amount of value to bring through owning what makes us an HSP. And our value lies very much in our perspective. So whatever area of life it is that matters most to us, we're going to be experiencing the world more deeply in that area. So the two work hand in hand. And often what comes with that is a real drive to want to make a difference in the world in that area. And that's very strong in us as HSPs. And often I don't think we realize quite just how strong that is. In other words, we often are in jobs or roles that we feel we ought to be because our parents want us to be or society wants us to be, and we end up miserable in the wrong career for many years because there's this burning calling within us to make a difference in a particular area, or at least to pursue an area of life that really enchants us and fascinates us. Now, often what it takes for us to really be able to embrace and follow that means being an entrepreneur, and it means having our own business. So we're on our own agenda and we're able to truly honor our value and actualize that value by making a difference for people in the area of life that we're born to serve in. So that makes us suited to being an entrepreneur and being in business, but it's very important that we are in business in a way that works for us as HSPs and not the way that seems to work for everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you know my story because I did the coaching work with you. So yeah, it was like pulling teeth getting me to this point, I think.
You're not alone in that. It was the same for me, Karen, don't worry. Still.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if it wasn't for you, this podcast wouldn't exist. I wouldn't be doing this work. It took, it took a lot of deep work and a lot of soul searching and a lot of conversations and coaching to get to this point. So I'm very grateful for you and the work that you did because of that.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And so one of the things I think that you were talking about there is how we do this to our own agenda. And I think that's really important because it's so easy to feel like a failure or to feel like a loser or to feel, bad about yourself because why can't I just get on and do this like everybody else? Why am I struggling when I come home from work and I'm exhausted? I had those experiences as well when I was trying to transition out of a 9-to-5 job. It's really hard because you compare yourself to most other people who seem to be able to go like Duracell bunnies. And we're just not like that. Yeah, it's important, isn't it, that we're able to structure our time and energy. So do you have any sort of thoughts on how mothers can do that?
Yeah, for anybody, whether we're HSPs or not, making the transition from full-time work into a business, it's hard for everyone. And one of the things that's really going to carry us through that is to make sure we are being really honest about the work that we really want to do and where our natural skill set lies as an HSP. If we're going into the wrong business or we're looking for shortcuts or trying to make money in ways that other people seem to be making money, that's where things are going to go wrong. So it's got to be on the foundation of where our natural skill set lies and where that real drive is to want to make a difference. And then we have to prioritize in terms of what we know we're good at and prioritizing what's going to move the needle in the business. So outsourcing as soon as we can is very important, and not getting bogged down in too much of the kind of the administration of the business, to make sure that we are taking bold steps towards finding the people that we know we can really serve and building networks and relationships as soon as we can to grow our audience and our network. So it is just trusting that we have great value to bring and making bold steps in how we can start to actualize that and start to see that happening. That's what makes the difference.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that from my own experience for sure. And also with clients as well, seeing that. And we have an advantage, don't we, as HSPs, in the fact that we really can make those deep inquiries within ourselves. Sometimes it can feel difficult to do it, which is where support is just so useful. And I know you always talk about this particular support, i.e., with other HSPs, because they understand.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yes. That's really important to be among other HSPs, not only so we can normalize the experience we're having and what makes us different, but also to be among other HSPs that are doing the same, trying to make the same transitions that we are, so we can support each other in that way. That is very important, very much.
Do you feel that as HSPs, we tend to be quite resilient or not? What's your thought?
Yeah, yes. I think it's a bit of a paradox here because of the word sensitive and because we do get overwhelmed easily. We are sometimes there's that connotation with weakness, that association with weakness. Actually, when we think about the internal work that HSPs are actually capable of, we are incredibly resilient when it comes to our personal evolution and our personal development. If we look back over our lives, perhaps when we were teenagers or in early adulthood, the difference between where we are now, if we've allowed ourselves to truly evolve and to truly take the steps we should have done, it's incredible what we achieve. And I think that is very much down to our relationship with truth as HSPs. We are not very good at being in a place of inauthenticity. We're not very good at small talk. We're not very good at pretending. We have to be in alignment with truth in order to support our own well-being. It's a very weird wasteland for us if we are not being true to ourselves. And that, in my experience, is what drives this evolution in ourselves, to find what it means to be the truth of who we are, to find what it means to truly belong in the world in the way that we're meant to be. And to walk that path, that is the greatest path of personal evolution that is there for us, for all human beings across the board. And that takes tremendous resilience to do that, to face what's not real in us and to move forwards to a place of truth and veracity. So I think we are incredibly resilient in what we are able to achieve.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. It's very encouraging and empowering to realize that we've all been through these dark days and moments, and just because we can feel the depths of it doesn't mean that we can't keep going with it, because the flip side of that is that we get to experience those high joys as well. It makes it all worthwhile then.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And also, in my experience, we actually recover much more quickly than we give ourselves credit for. And I think we do feel the lows very deeply, and we do have that tendency to overprocess and think, it's my fault, there's something wrong with me. And that can accentuate the low points much more. And I think all people have that. But we do have an ability to recover. And as long as we're resting properly and we are really loving the journey that we're on and really self-loving ourselves through this roller coaster, then it is amazing what we can recover from, how quickly we can recover, and how quickly we can move into new areas. And if we're really using that radar of truth and really being honest about what we need and who we really are, then we can take big leaps in the right direction because of that sensitivity to really observe what's going on.
Yeah, that's great. Is there anything that I haven't brought up that you'd like to say?
I think we've covered some really important pieces here. I think for any HSP mothers and fathers that are listening to this, who are thinking about making that transition into running a business, into being an entrepreneur, first of all, that you've got to reach out to you, Karen. I mean, from all the work that I have done with you over the years, your ability to support women in this area is just amazing. And your own path and your journey of what you've accomplished and how your own high sensory intelligence works. You were born to support mothers through this transition. And I don't say that lightly. I really recommend that you book a call and speak to Karen. But the other thing I just want to say is that it's so important for us as HSPs to recognize our value and to recognize that our sensitivity is an incredible superpower. And when we line these things up and we're very honest about the change we want to make, then there is a tremendous opportunity to do really well in business, but we do need the right support to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for your kind words. That's much appreciated. And I definitely can say that right back at you that, yeah, the work that you're doing is great. Bringing us all together is just great. It's so important, the community, knowing that you're not alone, knowing that there are other people like you, and yet normalizing the fact that these abilities that we have are superpowers, because that takes some reframing, it takes some getting used to. But when you see other people and you see how amazing they are, you realize by association, well, you must be pretty amazing as well. And you have a great ability to recognize that and to help people bring that out within themselves to understand their gifts. So yeah, I highly recommend any of your programs, the identity journey or the coaching program.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. Thank you.
Love it. Thank you.
Enjoyed today's episode? If you haven't already, I'd be so grateful if you could subscribe and leave a quick review. It really does help other high sensory mothers discover this podcast. To stay connected, visit my website where you can sign up to receive episode updates straight to your inbox. Or book a free call if you're curious about working together. Thanks so much for listening, and I look forward to next time when I'll share more insights on embracing your high sensory gifts.